Yes, I hear. Let me just remind everybody to put yourself in speaker mode, so you'll be seeing the speaker primarily. I'm going to keep everybody on mute. If you have questions or comments, please write them in the chat room, or at the end, raise your hand, and I'll call on you. So it is my great pleasure to now introduce Janice Kamenir-Reznik, along with Zev Yaroslavsky and Happy Kessler Amado, to talk about the next chapter, retirement in the 21st century. Let me tell you a little bit about Janice. Many of you know Janice from VBS, but besides being a UCLA undergrad and Hebrew Union College and USC grad, she's got her law degree at UCLA. She and her husband are longtime members of VBS. And after practicing environmental law for over 20 years, she left her law practice to co-found the Jewish World Watch with Rabbi Schulweis as a Jewish response to genocide and mass atrocities. And more recently, many of us know she co-founded the Jews United for Democracy and Justice, which is a broad, non-sectarian, nonpartisan cross-section of American Jews who stand together asserting a Jewish voice to safeguard the principles and foundations of our constitutional democracy. And she helped develop this program for us today by recruiting our two other speakers and panelists, Happy and Zev. Janice, thank you for joining us. We welcome you and look forward to our conversation with you.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. First of all, it's Honey, not Happy, but she is happy. I'm really grateful to both Honey and Zev for sharing the stage with me today, because I think you'll be able to get a lot of great, inspiring information and ideas from them as well. I also want to thank Joel and Bill for inviting me, and whoever else was responsible. It's always a pleasure to see so many great VBS co-members, since we haven't seen you in person for a really long time. So I see a lot of friends on. I even see one of my husband's former law professors on, and it's just great to be here. So we've all learned how to connect in this sort of way that we never could have imagined to feel a connection, but you can still create that connection online. It's really pretty phenomenal. So when I think about the topic, when I thought about the topic that we developed for today, the first thing I wanted to do is I looked at the recent research and some Pew studies. So I wanted to share that with you, which I'll do in a second with a short PowerPoint. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own retirement journey, such as it is. And then I'm going to ask Zev and Honey to come on and give you some thoughts about their career changes into retirement. The word retirement doesn't mean the same as it is meant historically, and that's what I'm going to start with. So I'm going to share my screen and pray that this works. I think it will. Give me a second. All right. So you all see that, right? Okay, good. So, I mean, this is what retirement sort of used to look like, the classic idea of retirement, the palm tree, the ocean, the sun, laying, sitting with maybe even a Mai Tai or something, whatever people drink when they do that sort of thing. But I think that was one of the visions of retirement, and happy retirement. Some people really look forward to that point in their life when they could do nothing and feel no sense of a requirement or responsibility. These are retirement cards. I just looked online and I said, what do you send somebody when they're retiring? And this was sort of what I would call now is sort of a dated version of retirement, at least amongst the baby boomers, which I am part of that generation. Baby boomers, I think it's 1946 to 1962 or so, the people born during those years. And there's definitely some pretty significant changes that the research has revealed in terms of what retirement means to the boomer generation. These are like, how Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had a book on the 5 classic stages of grief. on death and dying. And there's the same sort of thing if you look in the retirement literature. This is how it used to look. They talk about 5 stages of retirement. You have this idea when you're working about what you're going to do when you retire, what your retirement's going to look like. So then all of a sudden the last day of work comes, you get your gold watch or whatever they gave you as a gift. And you go into this honeymoons phase 2, which is this, no responsibility. That's what you think it's going to be like. No responsibility. It's a honeymoon. It feels great because you don't have to get up at 7 in the morning and be at work by 9, dressed a certain way and reporting to certain people. Well, that phase 3, you move into phase 3 when the honeymoon's over, maybe after a few weeks even for some people, and you get a little anxious about, did you make a mistake? Should you have stayed on a job longer? Should you have re-envisioned what it was going to mean? And you might only be in your 60s, and what are you going to do for the rest of your life? And some people get very disenchanted, so they reorient, moving into stage 4, reorientation of what your life is like. And then ultimately people find some kind of, hopefully, an equilibrium and stability. And those are what is known in the literature as the 5 classic stages of retirement. I put an X through it because I don't really think, maybe in certain ways it still applies, but I don't think it's as relevant in that linear kind of thinking as it used to be. So there's changing times, and a lot of the changes revolve around economic changes in our society. First of all, people are living a lot longer, which automatically increases the amount of money you need to survive yourself. It also increases the number of grandchildren and great-grandchildren you might have that you might feel some financial responsibility for. So there's just a lot of factors in our lifespan and economic circumstances which have created a new definition of how much money you need to be able to survive in your retirement, and who also are you going to be responsible for? Because maybe your children or grandchildren need help. I think that the people I talk to, most people are helping their children and grandchildren with down payments on houses, paying their kids tuition if they want them to go to a Jewish day school. Of course, I'm talking to a demographic for whom that's important, and people would even work longer to be able to afford to do that. That's not true in all demographics. It's not true in every community, but I'm really talking to you, the VBS membership, that would think in those terms about helping your kids stay in LA, which is extremely expensive, which requires a lot more assistance, or wherever they're going. The kind of down payments you need for homes create a lot more pressure on people to earn more. Of course, why are people living longer? That's sort of obvious. You've got medical advancements. You have all kinds of medical, heart-related, cancer-related, fake limbs, fake elbows, fake knees. All kinds of advances which have made old age much more comfortable and not feeling like you're in old age. You're still active. You're still playing tennis, maybe at 80 years old, which was sort of unheard of in prior generations. But so there's the plus and the minus. It's the increased cost of it all, but also the longer period of time that you can feel healthier and wanting to live longer, because there's so many things that can be fixed when they hurt, and so many great medical advancements. The literature reveals that boomers are much more likely, those who are urban dwellers, much more likely to work well into their 70s, and much more likely if they're educated. So college educated people tend to work longer into their older years, and urban dwellers do the same. At least half of the workers ages 55 and older are expected to retire after they're 65. And that was a few years ago, and it's even increased since then. So many people don't see 65 as the magic retirement age, even though it's the Medicare age. So the whole way, if you're living till you're 90, it's very different than if you're living till you're 75 or 80, as it used to be, like in my grandparents' years when my grandfather died when he was 70, which is my age now. They said, oh, he lived a full life, when many of us feel like we're just sort of starting out. So now there are, by the way, anybody wants to ask a question, Joel, you'll just have to let me know if there's questions already, but I'm not looking in the chat, so you'll have to advise me. So there are some workplace trends that are interesting to note. amongst boomers. And there's a lot of things that really encourage people to work much longer on their jobs, on income earning jobs, flexible schedules, especially now after COVID. There's just a huge change, and there are some recent articles written about the greater likelihood. I mean, a lot more boomers did retire because it was an obvious. I mean, there was such a dramatic change in our society that many felt, okay, this is my time to retire. Excuse me, to retire. But flexible work schedules, and I see it with my husband. All of these facts, he can do his full-time work as a lawyer at home. Golf in the middle of the day, but still work 10 hours at his desk from home, having meetings much more efficiently, much more can get done. So it encourages people who want to keep working to be able to work, especially if it's from home. There's also the gig economy, which some people think of as like Uber drivers and that sort of thing. But the gig economy can also work in more professional capacities where you move into consulting roles. I mean, I think that's also like a gig economy. So where you were a full-time accountant, but now you're being hired on an hourly basis by your old firm to consult on certain matters, or maybe by a forensics firm, a law firm who needs some consultative help. So, there's a much greater incidence right now of those kinds of consultative jobs. Remote working, new conferencing tools, as we all know. People who want to travel or are caregiving for parents or for grandchildren, they can still work. They can work remotely without having to spend 3 hours a day as we normally would in LA commuting. So you can still be efficient and work remotely. There's a lot of boomers who are very interested in lifelong learning, such as many of the people on this call. I mean, you're obviously interested in lifelong learning, so people can learn new skills. And there's ways now online to learn new skills without even having to go to classes outside of your home. People they call it upskilling, sharpening skills or learning new skills that create new capacities for new gig work even. There's intergenerational opportunities. There's an article about how the boomers said, well, intergenerational workplaces with older people, and it would now be like 3 generations, young people in their 20s, mid-range people in their 50s, and then people in their 70s and even 80s. Many people feel that enhances creativity and it opens larger market shares to different businesses to be able to understand how different generations work and what appeals to them. And many people have found that to be a very good addition in the workplace to have 3 generations working in the same company. You also have an increased number of people who want to do mission-driven work, do good while doing well, and I think that sort of relates to the way I have designed my career and retirement, which I'll talk about more personally in a minute. And a lot of people, because of the increased healthcare costs, they stay on a job because they need the benefits. And that can be a big savings for people and can really enhance their retirement life. I'm trying to switch to the next slide if I can. Yes. So is 70 really the new 50? I mean, that's what, we all joke of 80 is the new 60. And then you say, well, really, is it? Well, in certain ways it is. I mean, you can see what Michael Douglas says, well, maybe 55, not 50. I mean, there's so many great advancements, and I thank all the doctors, and I know that there are some on this call, and the scientists who have created, so many remedies for all of our aches and pains and things that would otherwise really destroy our older age. Now don't do that anymore, which is amazing. But I think it's really true that, is 9 o'clock the new midnight? I mean, yeah, Mother Nature's still there, and you're still not going to have the same amount of energy when you're 70 as you did when you're 50, no matter how many medical interventions there are. So, there is something to be said about staying young longer, more flexible, and more interested in work, but you also get more fatigued. So, but I came away thinking when I did this little bit of research, and I'm not a social scientist, that yes, there's many more people to take care of. You've got more 4th-generation families, which puts more pressure on the earners to make more money to help, especially with the increased cost of college. When I went to UCLA as an undergraduate, it was $50 or $70 a quarter. Now it's thousands. and the salaries have not kept up with that kind of proportionate increase in tuitions. And at the state school, colleges are super expensive and puts a lot of pressure on those that earn to keep earning, to earn more, to work harder. I mean, that's a lot of pressure. And then you have, of course, anti-acid, which I love that. I'm going to retire and live off my savings. And then what will I do the second week? I have no idea, meaning you better have a big fat savings account if you're going to really retire, or some kind of a way to have income. By the way, there are some downsides to this intergenerational and, working longer. You get, people, you hear this all the time, everything's fine, but I wish my husband would go back to work. And then you also have I had never heard of it before, but I guess there was a whole meme that went around the internet a number of years ago. So it was called the OK Boomer, where you get a lot of this kind of friction between the younger generation and boomers. The younger generation annoyed that the boomers aren't retiring because all the good jobs are locked up with aging boomers, and the younger people feel very annoyed by it. And then, of course, just the normal friction between the way people do things in different generations could cause friction as well. But the OK Boomer thing was really more about the workplace and taking up, I'm stopping my share if I can do that. Hold on, stop share. Okay, there. Okay, great, I'm back. So that was just my little cursory review of the literature on the field about, retirement age is getting older, much older, people working well into their 70s in high pressure jobs. Now, keep in mind, and I'm talking here, and I saw a comment in the chat, this is a specific socioeconomic grouping that I'm talking to today. We're not talking, some people absolutely cannot afford to retire and live on living on very small Social Security amounts. And that's a whole other issue, which I am not going to get into today. I'm talking about people who had professional jobs or higher revenue jobs, who had the option of working longer, but chose to retire. So let me tell you a little bit about my own story, because I end up concluding that the way you envision retirement and your old age is very, very much connected to how your parents lived and taught you to live, by their example and by the values in your house. And in my particular case, I think my parents were pretty unusual. My father, who's gone, he died about 11 years ago at almost 90 years old. He was a dentist because that was the free education that was offered to him during the Second World War. They needed dentists, so they sent him to dental school. I don't know that he was particularly interested in that. But meanwhile, he did practice dentistry for many years. At the same time, he also loved working in the Jewish community as a volunteer, and became a licensed general contractor and loved to volunteer for the community for building different community buildings. They were active at Sinai Temple, and they were very involved my dad was very involved in construction related to the Sinai Temple that exists at Beverly, Glen, and Wilshire. We joined it when it was at 4th in New Hampshire in the early 50s, when we came to California from Chicago. My dad then, when my husband went to law school in the 70s, my dad said, well, that seems really interesting. And then he went to law school in his mid 50s after his 5 children were already out of the house. And he started a new career at 60 years old as a lawyer. And my mother did the same thing. This was not like some big design they had. It was just not seeing themselves wedded to a singular career. And, they weren't particularly wealthy people. They weren't that much about acquiring wealth. My dad was always pursuing interesting opportunities, things that would stimulate his mind and fulfill his desire to work in the community. And my mother, who had been a high school teacher before she had children, stopped working, which was very traditional in those days. My mother, by the way, is still alive. She's 97 years old and still kicking strong on the Jewish Family Service Board and still quite active. So after we all left the house, my mother decided to go get a master's in gerontology, which she did at USC. And she became a gerontologist, but she never took a job as a gerontologist. Rather, she volunteered at Jewish Family Service for like 30 years or 35 years as a caseworker, never really feeling the need to be employed, but wanting some flexibility And as I said, they weren't wealthy people, but they also weren't particularly acquisitive people. So they, did what they earned enough to be able to live the life they wanted. But what I got out of all of that is there's no such thing as career for life. It never struck me that you make a choice and do one thing and have to stick with that. And I think the advantage of that for me was that it wasn't, I sort of followed what I wanted to do at the time. When I graduated college, my dream was always to be a social worker and to work in adoption. And I got my degree in social work at USC after I graduated college. And I went to work during there's internship. So I did an internship at Vista Del Mar. This was in 1973. And I realized immediately that that was my dream for like 10 years and I didn't want to do it. It didn't work for me. It happened to be right during the 73 war in Israel that I started my internship. And immediately I realized I wanted to be out there doing stuff for Israel. I didn't really want to be confined in this 10 by 10 room, helping people with problems I just couldn't really focus on. So right then I changed my major in graduate school and went in the path of community organizing, which is another path of social work. And when I got out of school in 1975, I went to work for the Jewish Federation doing Soviet Jewry advocacy. And that was a wonderful job. In fact, both of our guests that are going to speak in a few minutes, Zev and Honey. Honey I met, Zev I knew before, but Honey I actually met in the Soviet Jewry movement. We were both activists, and it felt so right to actually be able to work in a field that was also fulfilling my ambition to help the Jewish people. I felt that after the Holocaust, I was already married and my husband's family were survivors. And I was so inculcated with the horrors of the Holocaust that it felt so important to be involved in the Soviet Jewry movement, which was sort of the first opportunity that American Jews had to really engage in a very significant way in saving a huge mass of Jews who might otherwise have been lost to our people. So that was a great thing to do. And after about 4 or 5 years of that, it was an exhausting job. It was one of those 24-hour jobs. I loved it. But this is very personal. So sorry if it's too personal for some of you. We couldn't have children at the time. And I wanted to adopt children and my husband didn't want to adopt yet, but we made a pact when I was 30, if we hadn't had children yet, then we could adopt. And at the time I was 27 years old. And I said, oh my God, what am I going to do for the next 3 years to really occupy myself? And my husband and my dad and my sister had just all finished law school and I didn't see them for 3 years. So I said, that's a great thing to do to really get my mind off of my infertility problems. So I went to law school and I didn't really see it as a career change. I didn't even know what I was getting into. Frankly, I didn't know anything about law other than the fact that all these people I knew had gone to law school. So I went to law school and it really solved my infertility problem because I came out with a 2-week-old baby that I was able to give birth to during my last year of law school. So it was productive in that way. And it was also very exciting. It was women were just starting to enter the legal field. A small percentage of my class at the time were women. And within about a year or two after that, it was 50-50. It was a very transitional time in the law and for women in sort of more high-powered professional jobs. So it was actually, I grew immediately to be very excited about practicing law. I went into business with my husband because I wanted to be able to nurse my baby, and I got pregnant right away again. I have 3 kids within 4 years after everybody telling us we'd never be able to have children. So it was a very exciting time, but I also realized how much I loved the practice of law. I was a litigator, and my husband and I developed our law firm, and I got very involved in the field of real estate litigation and ultimately in environmental litigation. And I loved it. It was very stimulating. It was an exciting practice. But immediately I saw that the thing I really loved about being a lawyer were the volunteer opportunities that came along with the JD degree. And I got very involved in several legal advocacy organizations, the most significant of which was California Women Lawyers. At the time, we were really fighting for to preserve abortion rights. And also pay equity. So those issues really grabbed me. And I would say I spent as much time working on my advocacy agenda as I did billing clients for my legal work. And I think, that is the sort of a continuous thing throughout my life. I was always more interested in, it ends up that I was always more interested in social justice issues than in the actual work of being a lawyer, or the actual, what people classically think as social work. And so in that respect, when Rabbi Schulweis called me in 2004 and asked me if I would help him begin Jewish World Watch, it was a relatively easy transition. It was technically a retirement, because that is when I stopped earning money as a person in the workforce. I was no longer technically a member of the workforce, because workforce is an economic term, which means you're either on a job where you're getting paid or you're looking for a job for which you're going to get paid. And I dropped out of the workforce in order to dedicate myself fully to volunteer work. And since 2004, that's really what I have been doing. I worked really hard, as most of you know, because you would hear the progress of the organization. We built an amazing organization. I traveled 15 or so times to different weird places in Africa, things I never thought I would do in my life. And I really had never thought about genocide as being one of the issues that would capture me. But as soon as Rabbi Schulweis mentioned it to me, I had this epiphany immediately when he said, what are you going to do about the genocide in Darfur? I didn't know at the time there was a genocide in Darfur. And all of a sudden, in a flash, I realized I never thought of anybody else's genocides as having anything to do with me. For me, it was about the Holocaust and making sure people knew what had happened and the horrors of the Holocaust. And he really, like he did for so many of us in so many different ways, opened up my eyes to realizing what narrow thinking that was, that if we're going to bemoan all the people who did nothing during the Holocaust, then how can we stand idly by when other people are being targeted? And we've had nothing but one after the other over the last 17 years. Now we're dealing with the Rohingya and with the Uyghur. It's just very sad to see what's going on in the world right now. Things are not necessarily improving in terms of the way people are being treated, certain groups of people. So, and I continue with my work. I work about 70 hours a week right now between Jewish World Watch and Jews United for Democracy and Justice. And I also sit on the board of the School of Social Work at USC. And I'm on a couple of other boards, but those are the three areas that occupy me. I work as hard as I did when I was making money. I never really had much of a transition issue, because I went right from one intense experience to the next intense experience, and never really stopping. Now, one of the things that sort of helps me, and it's sort of sad as well, is I do have grandchildren, but they don't live in Los Angeles. So if they lived in Los Angeles, I would definitely not have as much time as I have. I'd be much more involved day to day with grandchildren, which I would love to do. I have 2 unmarried children in LA, and they don't have kids yet, and they may not, because they're both sort of almost 40 years old. But I think that's a big difference. Those of you who have lots of grandchildren here, I think that would be definitely something I would invest a great deal of time in, because I think that's really important. But it sort of liberated me from other obligations. The fact that we do travel to see our kids. Before COVID, we used to go once a month for 4 days. And now we'll hopefully start that again. But I'm very entrenched in the work I'm doing, so it doesn't really change when I'm away. I continue to do my work, and I feel very committed to it. So I'm looking sort of in chat and seeing if there's, I'm happy, before I introduce our first guest, who's going to also talk to you about his retirement experience, and I put it in quotes because I think, it looks different. I haven't seen Zev wear a gold watch. He does have a cigar from time to time, but I don't see him with his gold watch or sitting on the beach. And same with my friend Honey. So Joel, should I look at the chat, or do you want to pose questions?
No, we'll hold off on the comment, because I think it's more general to all of the speakers.
Okay. All right, great. So I'd like to introduce Zev. Are you able to turn your camera on and your speaker? Oh, I'm sorry. Honey's going first.
Honey's up.
Yeah, Honey's going first. Okay, let me introduce my friend Honey. Honey Amado, and she'll tell you more about her career. She's my very dear, dear, dear friend. We met in 1975 or 76 in the Soviet Jewry movement. I just have to quickly tell you the story because it'll tell you everything about Honey. We were both very young women, and I was working at the Federation doing Soviet Jewry work, as I said, and I get a call from somebody whom I did not know. We were about to plan, I don't know if any of you were involved in this, but we used to go once or twice a year up to the Soviet embassy up in San Francisco. We didn't have one in Los Angeles. And we would take 50 or 60 or 70 people on an airplane ride and a bus, and we'd go do a demonstration in front of the Soviet embassy. I get a call from somebody who said, I really want to come with you. I feel very strongly about this issue. I can't afford the $100. Can I pay it off at $10 a month? And I said, well, yes, I have no idea who you are, but of course you can. And she did. And Honey was a very young lawyer then, and came with us on the trip. And not only was she a great activist and continues to be, but she's also been my dear friend since then. So Honey, I can't see you, but I know you're there somewhere.
Yeah, I am here.
Meet Honey Amado.
Good morning. I'm pleased to say that I paid off that $100. As you gained a baby in law school through Soviet Jewry, I gained a dear, dear friend and many of my friends throughout my life from that movement, which only underscores that our friends are so often people with whom we share values and then indeed share lifetimes. Joel, of all the people that you could misname me to call me Happy, I have a very dear friend from childhood, Happy Browdy. Some of you may even know Happy. And at our beloved rabbi's 90th birthday, Rabbi Mordechai Soloff, at his 90th birthday, Rabbi Herman Berman, who was the head of the Reform movement, said of him, what can you say about a rabbi who turns two kids named Happy and Honey onto Judaism? So that was a great name that you would call me Honey, that you would call me Happy. It was great. My parents called me Honey. It was great that you called me Happy. So I know Janice wanted to ask me why I would retire from a successful appellate law career. So let me first start by saying what an appellate lawyer does. I represent clients not in the trial court, but in the courts of appeal and in the Supreme Court, in the review courts. The body of California law under which we all live is made up, it's a common law system. It's made up of statutes which are passed by the legislature, the various people that we're electing or seeking to oust. They create the laws. And how those laws are applied or interpreted is determined by the courts. And when a court publishes a case, that becomes part of our common law, that becomes a part of the body of our law. And those attorneys who practice in the appellate arena are helping to create that body of case law that interprets our California statutes and is part of our law. So I practiced in that arena I was an attorney and I retired from that for about 44 years, and probably about 35 of it was as an appellate attorney. And I have about 30 published cases. So I've been able to impact and mold California law in the area of family law, and that's been very meaningful. So the question of why I retired is because I wanted to pursue other interests. My Rabbi Zoe Klein-Miles, quoted Rabbi Bierman. I think she was quoting Rabbi Bierman when she said that the human being is much too magnificent to only do one thing in its life. And I found that I liked law very much. I found it very stimulating. I liked being an appellate attorney, but there were other interests I wanted to pursue. And there were other things I wanted to do as well. So that was one of the reasons that I began to explore retiring, but it took me a very long time to be willing to retire because I enjoyed much of what we do as attorneys. it takes each law case, each appellate case takes about 2 years. So every time I would agree to take another case, I knew that I was prolonging my retirement by at least 2 years. But and ultimately, by the way, I actually have it still in front of me. I put a sign on in front of my desk on the wall that said, there are other things you want to do, to remind myself to, in fact, start saying no to cases. But I knew that I would miss taking new cases because it's very stimulating. It's fun to think about what's the case about, what's the legal issue, how do I approach the legal issue, how will I brief the legal issue. It's fun to brief cases, to look at law deeply and really engage in an issue. And I knew that I would miss that. And I knew that I would miss being called. It's, you know, it's fun to be a rainmaker, and it's kind of heady to be a rainmaker, and people call you and beseech you to take their case. And you say, well, no, I'm actually retiring. I'm not taking any new cases. And they say, well, please, one more case. And I, more than once, I succumbed to one more case, which actually translated into one more year. So, but it wasn't as easy to retire as one would think. And I used to say, I kind of wish I was a librarian so I could say to somebody, January 1, I'm out of here. But I didn't have that, and it was evolutionary to retire. It was clear to me what I wanted to do, though I had no vision of what retirement would look like. In fact, I actually thought it would sort of be romantic to work for all of my life. And my dad worked all of his life. My dad chose to. My dad could easily retire, and he certainly slowed down. And my sister, who took care of the books of the business, actually kept telling him that the business couldn't afford to carry him. But he worked until he was 96. Until his last illness. And he was vibrant and exciting. He's also active in a synagogue. So he too, as Janice pointed out, the models of her parents, my parents were also models of vibrancy until the end of their lives. But I knew that I wanted to independently study. I wanted to study seriously and deeply Jewish values and how it has impacted our lives. Because I think that even for the least affiliated Jew, there is such a vestige of our values in their lives that they continue to be involved in issues that are really significant to the well-being of society. And I believe that comes from our text and our deep values. I wanted to write about what I would study. I've become quite enamored with Leviticus, a book that I think is the core of Judaism. And I've wanted to study it more deeply, write about it, write about values. I wanted to write about different insights I've had over life. You know, being into my 70s carries with it a certain acquisition of wisdom, and I share that no doubt with all of you. I thought it would be interesting to write about some of the things that I think about. I also wanted to engage in the important issues of the day and not feel compelled because of my caseload to have to pass on some of the issues that I wanted to engage in. I wanted to continue working in my synagogue without concern, again, about worrying about that I really should be working on a case and that I was ignoring a case and needed to turn my attention back to it. I served as president of my synagogue while I was working, and I've continued to be active in the synagogue and active in the community. I'm pretty active in American Jewish Committee and will continue doing that. And then I wanted to enjoy my family and my friends without watching the clock. Many times Janice is my closest friend, and we'll look at our calendar and set something for 4 weeks into the future that we can squeeze out a couple of hours. And I started to conclude that this is ridiculous. That hasn't changed, by the way, in retirement. I thought that would change, and it hasn't. But one thing that's changed is I do pick myself up and drive to Arizona to see my Arizona kids. And I don't like fly in and fly out. I drive in, I stay for the weekend and drive out. I make it a 4-day weekend rather than a day and a half, plus air. And my real desire, well, they all were real desires, an additional desire was I wanted to read the newspaper. And with a cup of coffee, I liked print, and I didn't want to say, you know, wow, I need to be inside. I promised somebody a project, or I need to edit this brief and have it out to my client or back to my associate by 11 o'clock. So I couldn't sit and enjoy the newspaper. So I wanted to do all of that. And I started to become conscious of mortality. And in that consciousness of mortality, where I started to say, even as we say to one another, may you live to 120, I began to realize the likelihood of that was not great to be to 120. And so I wanted to carve out time that I could engage meaningfully in other things that I wanted to do. I did see that somebody posted in chat that we should talk about meaning in retirement, and the thread of my life, and clearly the thread of my dearest friends and all of my friends' lives, is to have meaningful lives. And that doesn't change from work to retirement. That thread continues. Another question that Janice had asked me to consider and address is whether I always had a vision, or whether I had a vision of what I would do within my retirement. And the answer is no, because I never envisioned retiring. As I mentioned, I really thought there was something kind of romantic about I'm going to work forever. I'm going to be an attorney forever. I suppose in some ways I don't stop being an attorney. I just stop being a practicing attorney. I take all those skills and just apply them elsewhere. But I had no vision of what I would do in retirement. I love the law. I love thinking about the law. I love the way law analyzes things. I love that law requires us to make a decision and to stand for something. I remember hearing a justice on the Supreme Court in Israel saying he was torn between philosophy and law. And he chose law because it's finite. You need to make a decision. He said, for example, on abortion, if he was a philosopher, he could debate the merits and demerits of abortion forever. If you're a lawyer, you know you have 9 months to make that decision. Or actually, if it's abortion, it's less time. But I do want to say, as an activist, not as little time as some of our sister states are trying to pretend one can make a decision about abortion. So no, I had no plans. When I started to say the R word to my father, he said to me, never think of it as retirement. You just think of it as repurposing. And that's true. It has not been retirement. It's simply been taking all these incredible skills that we develop as professionals and repurpose them. So one of the things, I have to laugh at the card that Janice put up about, happy retirement with the palm trees. I knew I would never be one who would sit on the beach or sit in the yard and do nothing. I knew that that was not ever anything that interested me. It didn't interest me to set up card games and mahjong games 1 day a week with friends. Although it would always interest me to be with my friends, but no, that didn't interest me. And I don't even like bonbons. So I knew I was never going to be sitting around eating bonbons. So when I started to think about our word, repurposing, I mentioned it to a very dear friend of mine who was a provost at USC who had retired. And I asked him, how did he transition? He's now a consultant who travels all over the world, actually advising on how to improve universities. He never takes failing universities. He takes universities on how they can improve. And he said to me, don't worry about what retirement will look like. If you can afford to retire, then do it. And retirement will take on its own form. Don't worry about planning it. And I really followed that advice. So my anxiety was never about what retirement would look like. I actually had anxiety about, would I ever really retire? Was that going to be the thing I kept saying, oh yes, someday I'm going to retire. Was I ever going to do it? And so I had no anxiety and have no anxiety about being retired. But as somebody mentioned, I am able to be in that economic class that was able to retire. So I went a long way from having to schedule payments for $100 and being able to retire. And just parenthetically, I will say that of blessed memory, Sarah, who owned, I'm going to forget the name of the store, and her son, I still get my Blue Love and Etrog every year from her son, Kogan, it must have been Kogan, in Fairfax. She had a store in Fairfax. And I walked in, I was pregnant with my first child. Atara, thank you, Janice. I walked in and I saw a beautiful silver mezuzah that it says, may you be blessed on your goings and comings. And I wanted that for my newborn baby. And that was probably also about $100. And I said to her, oh, this is beautiful. Can I pay it over time? And she said, yes, of course. And then she wrapped it up and gave it to me. And I said, no, I'm going to be paying it over time. And she said, you'll pay me. And she sent me home with the mezuzah. I paid her. I always go back to her. And it's close to 40 years later. She of blessed memory, I go to her son for not only my lulav and etrog, but for the lulav and etrog that I send every year to my friends in Osijek, Croatia, whose children had never seen, as of the year 2012, they had never seen a real lulav and etrog. And now every year they see one, they get one. So as I said, I had no specific plan, but I thought I would do consulting and editing of briefs. I love to write and I love to edit. And I actually have done very little of that. I've done some consulting, which I take on the consulting assignments, but in some way they have felt like an intrusion on my time. But it occurs to me, I have not pursued consulting and writing and editing. And I think for me, it was like the soft landing, that I wasn't leaving, I was just a soft exit. And so I could convince myself that I was still sort of in law by saying I would consult and write. And everybody that retires always talks about they're going to consult in whatever they did. But I have enjoyed some of the consulting, but have not pursued it. And as I said, it takes me away from some of the things that I'm really loving doing. So it's not something I'm pursuing. So what am I doing? Well, for one thing, one of the things I did want to do and spoke to the school about it before I retired, as retirement was coming, I am teaching writing workshops for science and engineering students at CSUN at Cal State Northridge. It's an add-on for them. It's not a charge. It's not a class. It's just a structured 1 or 2 days, and we still play with the structure of it. And I find that very meaningful. I've returned to AJC. I had taken a step back from it when I was president of my synagogue because there was only so many hours in the day, which I used to think was a flaw in the eternal plan. I used to think that 24 hours was too little and we needed more hours so that I could rest, relax, and see my friends and not watch the clock. And then I realized that the flaw was in my thinking, because had God given us more than 24 hours, I would have spent those additional hours working. So it was not such a flaw. So I went back to AJC, and AJC has become an outlet for addressing many of the public issues that I'm concerned with in an organized way. So that I'm on their public policy committee, and that's been an effective way to address issues. Of course, I've continued to be active in the synagogue and took on additional responsibilities in my synagogue, which is Temple Isaiah. I'm also a member of the Sephardic Temple, but I'm not as active there at the Sephardic Temple. I also took on, but this was before I retired, but have continued with, of course, as the case continues, an immigration case, which I do through Catholic Charities, and I do that pro bono. And just parenthetically, I specifically chose Catholic Charities for 2 reasons. One is they have a wonderful mentoring program, and they have mentored me in my representation of a family. And the second reason was I wanted them to know they are not alone in our immigration issues and in these struggles around the world and in their struggles of immigration here, that they have partners. Also learning from Rabbi Schulweis that we had so few partners, both during the Shoah and even in our Soviet Jewry movement, but that it felt meaningful to me to partner with people serving the Hispanic community. I also have the extraordinary honor of being allowed to take classes at HUC in the rabbinic program. I was invited to do that by Rabbi Devorah Weisberg, and so I audit a class a semester, and I get to deep dive. And because I'm an auditing student, the only thing I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. I do all the classwork and homework so that I can participate meaningfully, but I don't do the term assignment, the term paper. I don't have to do that. And I've undertaken and engaged on a number of projects that I wanted very much to do that I could not have done when I was working. And that is, I seriously engaged in the 2020 election. I worked on a voter hotline that's for attorneys only. And I did that again for the runoff in Georgia. And that was very, very meaningful, meaningful. I've engaged in responding to voter suppression in our sister states. And that has been, again, very meaningful. I organized a panel and pursue the issue of restorative justice and reparations for our Black community in America, America itself, facing the ills that we've done socially and as a country must respond to. And from all of that, then a professor asked me to look at a case law book that he's written on comparative law and asked me to pick a chapter out of it and review it. And that's been like super fun. And I can't believe I'm using words like, I don't know if that's, if we said that as boomers or if that's just a reflection of our children. But I've been reading that chapter, learning from it, loving doing it. And of course, as Janice can imagine, making margin notes. So, and I'm enjoying my kids. And I'm really loving that I don't watch the clock. And yes, I can say let's see each other on a Sunday afternoon, and I'm not working on Sundays. So the one thing I have not been able to do, which is my real goal, and that is to sit and study Leviticus. After taking a class in Leviticus with Tamara Ashkenazi, the extraordinary teacher and editor of A Woman's Commentary, the Torah, A Woman's Commentary, I'm rather impassioned about the book and have additional work that I want to do on it, and ultimately write about it and make that book accessible to through articles to lay people. So that I'm still looking forward to doing. And I'm enjoying myself. I actually have enjoyed not being responsible for rainmaking and not feeling obligated to clients. I really feel that's a bit liberating. So the third and last question that Janice asked me to introduce is to consider and address is the biggest difference between your life in retirement and your life before retirement. What's similar pre-retirement, what's similar post-retirement. So the biggest difference actually is it's very strange not earning money. It's really a strange feeling to be comfortable living on passive income. And from some comments that I've heard and from some lectures that I've listened to, this seems to be something that's more difficult for women. I've been an earner since I am 27 years old, and I'm now going to be 72. I retired at 71, and that still feels peculiar. And I frequently check in with my assistant to say, you know, are you sure I'm okay? And she reminds me that I am. And when I meet with my financial advisor once a year, I said to him, this is like 100 first dates. Every time I meet with you, you tell me that I'm financially secure, and I feel great about it. I will tell you well, I won't tell you the funny anecdote because I see that the time is running out, and Zev is also, I'll tell you, Janice, later. but I want to be conscious of time. Life in retirement is much more relaxed, for sure. It's more relaxed. And as I said, I've had the freedom to pursue more of the issues that I'm concerned about. The similarities are, and my kids tease me about this when I send them an email at 2 o'clock in the morning, I am still up as late as ever, working on the different projects and finishing them and polishing them in different programs I put on and in different things I've been asked to participate in. I still don't have sufficient time to read all the articles and the books that I want to read. In fact, I begin to measure my mortality with the list of books that I'll never get to. So that's similar. And the other similarity, and with which this is with which I'll end, and that is that my life is still so interesting. I'm still involved in intellectually and meaningful and invigorating things. And that has never changed. And I doubt that that will ever change. So thank you, Janice, for inviting me and letting me think about these issues.
Thank you so much, Honey. That was so great. Honey didn't tell you that she's having her first grandchild next week.
Right.
So that'll change we'll come back next year and we'll hear more about your retirement when you have a local grandchild to attend to.
Right. So I must leave as I'm expecting breakfast guests. That's different. And this was really fun. And thank you for inviting me and including me.
Thanks
Well,
so
Honey,
much.
thank you very, very much for joining us. And I got the name right at the end.
Yes, thank you, Joel.
But Honey is happy. So
But
you're
I
not 100% wrong.
Right. All right. Bye-bye. In regards to Zev. So I'll look forward to listening later to the recording so I can hear Zev.
Great. I'm hoping that Zev hears me and will turn on his camera and his microphone. There he is. When I was asked to do this program, I asked two really special people to join me because I thought it would be a lot more interesting to hear different perspectives on retirement. And, Zev has an interesting perspective because he just doesn't believe in it. But I'll let him tell you that. You all know Zev. He doesn't really need an introduction, but he's been a fixture in Los Angeles for the last 50 plus years in terms of public life. And he continues his vigorous workload even as he's a few years older than me, but he's continuing to be as productive as ever. But I'm going to let him tell you about that. Welcome, Zev.
Thanks, Janice. And I did not print out the questions, and I did not
That's
take.
okay. I have them.
So if you could just ask me the first question.
Yes, I will.
Yeah. No.
Okay. I asked each Zev and Honey different questions. This is your first question. You could easily have retired when you left the Board of Supervisors, which was about 4 years ago, right?
6 years.
6 years ago. Why didn't you just retire and you had got a pension, you were a government employee? What made you not retire?
So I don't know what retiring would do to me, and I've never, as far as I can recall, ever had a moment in my life when I wasn't busy doing something, whether it was as a high school student or as a college student when you and I first met and were active in the Soviet Jewry movement, or in running the Council for Soviet Jews for a couple of years, and then 40 years in local government, which is a career and a half. I just don't know how I would decompress. I actually had a person who was a professor at Claremont College when she realized I was going to be termed out and be sent into forced retirement. She brought me a book she had written about how politicians who leave office go into this kind of postpartum depression and how to mitigate it. And I said, I really don't, I'm not dreading not being in public office. 40 years, as I said when I announced I was leaving politics, 40 years is long enough, and it's time to make room for a younger generation of leaders. And I really did believe that. I also believed that when I got too cynical about my life's career in politics, that it would also be time to leave. Fortunately, I didn't have to make that choice because the choice was made for me by the voters of LA County, who voted to impose term limits on members of the Board of Supervisors. But then what to do after I leave? And I had a couple of fantasies as I was approaching retirement, and one of them was to write a memoir. I've been involved in a lot of stuff. I'll just leave it at that. The LA Times characterized me as having my fingerprints on virtually every consequential issue, both at the city and at the county. And I wanted to write about that. I'm a historian. I was trained as a historian. I got my undergraduate degree in economics and history and my master's in British Empire history, and I was in a doctoral program when I realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a library. But I did learn the important lessons of history, and I used the lessons of history during my political career, how to make decisions that look beyond the next election, but to look at long-term decision making and how that comports with your values and with the needs of the city or the county at the time. So I wanted to go back in my so-called retirement. I was asked by Chancellor Gene Block and the then Dean of the Luskin School of Public Affairs whether I'd be interested in coming, and also Professor David Myers, who's the Jewish history professor at UCLA, recruiting me basically to come to UCLA. I wanted to do that. I was a teacher when I was in college. I taught at a number of synagogues around town. It paid well. It allowed me to save money and to put myself through college. And I wanted to. And my father and mother were teachers. I had a long conversation with my father about what satisfaction he got out of teaching, and I thought that was the place for me, and I would love to go back to my alma mater and teach. But I wanted to do more than teach. I wanted to write my memoir, and I forgot to finish my thought on the memoir. I do believe that people who have been consequential in their lives, and consequential doesn't mean you're a well-known politician. It could mean you're an extraordinary parent. The people who have written memoirs about their lives, and every life is a book. And I wanted to write a memoir that paid homage to my grandfather, who was a Soloveitchik, who was one of the early labor Zionists. He was a delegate to the World Zionist Congresses, the first several Zionist Congresses in the first part of the 1900s. When I'm asked, is there anybody in history you would like to have had a chance to meet and talk to, it would be my grandfather, Shimon Soloveitchik, because he was an extraordinary visionary, lived a very difficult life, immigrated to this country with my young mother-to-be. And so I did a lot of research about my grandfather. Unfortunately, he left a lot of writings. And so the first chapter of my memoir, which is still a work in progress, it's about done, is about him. And then about my parents, who were themselves active labor Zionists and very well known in the Jewish education field here in Los Angeles. My mother was an assistant to David Ben-Gurion in the 1930s in New York when he came to raise money for the nascent yeshuv in Palestine, what was then known as Palestine. And so I come from good stock, and I wanted to pay homage to that because that's really who I am. In fact, a good friend of mine who read the memoir for me as a favor said that the agents will want you to cut that part about your family. Don't. It's what makes you who you are, and I think that's true. And then of course my life in public office, which I don't need to reprise here. But I'm amazed at how many people have not written a memoir, and an honest one, and that was something I wanted to do. I mean, Tom Bradley never wrote a memoir. In fact, there's never been an objective biography written about Tom Bradley, one of the most consequential mayors in the history of the city. Roz Wyman, who was a woman who served in the city council for 12 years, came in at the age of 22.
Zev, he got a little glitch in his computer. If you turn off your video so we can at least hear your voice, it'll give more power to your voice.
The seat that I later won, consequential in bringing the Dodgers here, among other things, and so it goes. Yeah, okay. I've largely completed that objective, and teaching was the second thing. And I didn't know how it would work. The dean of the school at the time said, teaching is not all that it's cracked up to be. Maybe you want to do some other stuff at UCLA. And I said, no, I come to UCLA to teach, among other things. And it's been very rewarding to be able to, and I teach public policy to graduate students. These are people who want to go into the field, either as politicians. In fact, one of my students just got elected to the state assembly last week in the Beverlywood, Cheviot Hills, Crenshaw area. Isaac Bryan is a wonderful human being, and I'm very happy for him. And I helped him a little bit and mentored him a little bit over the course of his years at UCLA, and I teach history. I teach a history, post-World War II history of Los Angeles course to seniors in the history department, which has been fascinating for me because I've learned a lot about LA history that I did not know. My dad used to tell me that he learns more from teaching than he imparts to his students, and he often learns more from his students. And that's been the case with me. It's been very rewarding to have students in my class who are the first in their family to ever go to high school, let alone to college, and help give them, set them on the right trajectory. I always ask my students, what do you want to do? Where do you want to end up? How can I help? And it's been very satisfying to help put people on the right trajectory, to avoid mistakes that I made as a young student or as a young politician. And I remember the people who gave me that kind of advice, people like, the Ed Sanders, Larry and Barbie Weinberg, who encouraged me and also helped keep me from walking off a cliff from time to time. That's very satisfying to me. The chancellor also has me working on some issues with him in our community about issues that, of course, affect the Jewish community on campus. And so and then I conduct an annual survey. This is one of the things I wanted to do to bring to UCLA, to the Luskin School, was to do public opinion research on the quality of life, how people view their own quality of life in the county, not what their opinion of the quality of life is, but how does it affect them? And we do that every year. We just released our annual survey last month, and it's used by academics, it's used by policymakers, which was the idea. So I've kept myself in the public policy space without being a politician. I was frankly tired of politics. I'd be a lot more tired about it now, tired of it now than I was 6 years ago. It's really become corrupted, and I mean it with a lowercase c, with the polarization. It's so difficult. Nonetheless, that's part of the price you pay for a democracy, but I was ready to do something else. I could have done a lot of other things. I could have become a consultant and made a lot of money. I had absolutely no interest in monetizing my career. Money was never important to me or Barbara. It was important to pay the bills, but it wasn't important to get rich. And it was never important to my parents. My parents left me with very little, me and my sister. I got the 200-year-old Machzor, which was in the Soloveitchik family for generations. I arm wrestled my sister for it, and my main argument, she lives in Haifa, which is a very beautiful but very humid city, and I said, if this book stays in Haifa for the next 50 years, it will disintegrate. Let me take it to a nice dry place, Southern California. Well, it's sitting here. It's in this room. And so that was the reason I went back to UCLA. It gives me meaning. I don't want to say keeps me busy, because I'm too busy. And the one thing I will add, Janice, is that under the category of once a city councilman or member of the Board of Supervisors, always a supervisor. I get calls every day. Can you help me with this? Can you take a position on that? Can you stop this ridiculous thing? And the professors at UCLA, I once made the mistake of complaining that I have to handle all my own phone calls, and they says, well, we all handle our own phone calls. I said, yes, but you didn't represent 2 million people for 40 years, for 20 years. And there's, oh yeah, I see your point. So but I'm having a ball. I enjoy it tremendously. They asked me to stay another couple of years. I've been on a 2-year stint every 2 years. I don't know how long I'll stay. I do have other things like Honey. I have other things I want to do, but I love it. And this last year with the pandemic has been different. I don't have the access to the students personally. I like students walking into my office and saying, do you have a few minutes to chat? I love being around academics who are very smart and from whom I can learn a lot. So this year has been a little more of an isolation chamber, but hopefully we'll be back next year to the normal regime. Now, what was your second question?
You know, you answered all three questions. And I think what's so interesting is if you boil down sort of what you said and what Honey said and some of my own thoughts, of course, you guys say it better than I do, is using the wisdom and the experience that you've achieved throughout your career and finding a way to get great joy out of them in your older years, as like you talk about being a mentor and writing a memoir. And, you know, those are very satisfying, maybe because there's no financial pressure. I mean, you're lucky that you have a job that you love that's still paying you money. But I suspect that even if it wasn't, you would be doing the same thing. Mentoring, writing your memoir, teaching other people, having them get the benefit of your experience. And I think, you know, I look at the picture of the 50 or 60 people on, there's so many of you that I know that are doing the same thing with your retirements, of using all of that wisdom and finding ways, whether it's through putting on programs like this that occupies Joel and Bill, or organizing the Rabbi Schulweis's 50,000 books as part of the Schulweis. I mean, it takes all the skills in I mean, Bill Green had all of this technical expertise, and now he's applying it to memorializing a great, you know, a great man that we all want to continue to learn from. And, you know, so I could probably go through many. I know Jerry Rabo in his retirement wrote a bunch of books, or some anyway. But I know that, and I think Helen's still teaching. And if not, I'm sure she is anyway. So I know that, you know, people who do great things during their careers are continuing to do great things in their retirement years. Maybe just dropping the stuff that you didn't like, you know, having to raise money for a campaign, Zev. Now you're raising it for other people, like your daughter-in-law who's running for city council, or, you know, or a student, Isaac, who was lucky enough to win that seat. So, you know, there's just ways to take, it's almost like cherry picking the things you love that you did, where you think you can add value to issues and that will stimulate you and others will benefit from. So we have 5 minutes left. So Joel, I was going to give you a chance if there were any questions you wanted to pose.
Yes,
to yours out.
thank you. Certainly, this is both real examples of repurposing. I like that term that was introduced earlier. I'm going to invite Barb and Lynn. They wrote in something in the chat room. I ask you to unmute and maybe expand a bit on your comment and question.
Yeah, well, this is just fabulous. And I want to say something to Janice. You have changed the lives of so many people, and we have so much respect for you. We have thousands of people now that tune in to learn about everything under the sun, and you're covering it all. So just thank you so much. We're so blessed.
Not only me, Zev's part of that team too.
I know that, and I totally agree, but you're a woman and I'm a woman. So anyway, let me move on. Let me move on. The other thing is that Lynn and I retired at 55 and Len retired at 80. And the timing of when we do these things is so important in terms of what our life's agenda is. And for me, I had spent a successful job of pretty much being the best I could be in my career. I have a PhD in public health and public administration from USC. And when I finished that, I said, I've never volunteered and I don't have any hobbies. My hobbies have changed my life. I'm a quilter and I do glass fusion. Everybody has their own thing. Absolutely look for hobbies. It's extremely important. It's a very right-brained activity. And many of us who are intellectuals, particularly those of us in the science world, we tend to exercise our left brain. I'm left-handed, thank goodness. My husband did a perfect job. I speak for Lynn. I'm the chatterbox. He's the stable. He's the one who really leads me in the right direction for making decisions. He's responsible for my having a career, getting a PhD with my degree on my 50th birthday from USC. I couldn't have done it without him. So I'm blessed to have a partner who is an enabler for women, for a woman, and not all men are. So we've been so blessed with that. Look for hobbies, you guys, and exercise, for heaven's sakes, every single day. Exercise. Nobody talked about that. It's not a sideline. It is a necessity. If you want to live to 100 and be happy, healthy, and be able to continue doing good work, exercise. It's just not an option. Anyway, I didn't mean to give you a lecture, but you've inspired me. You three have inspired me to chit chat with you.
You know, Barb, it's so funny what you say. First of all, I will say this about Zev. Even at high altitudes, my husband and I have a home in Colorado at 8,000 or 9,000 feet. Zev came to visit us. He ran 5 miles at 9,000 feet. So hats off to Zev. He still runs. I don't know if you want to chat. And I also really believe in exercise too. I have a trainer 3 mornings a week and I hike in between. And I also play Mahjong. I learned how to play Mahjong about 5 years ago with 4 friends from the temple in my Havara. And we do play Mahjong. Although this year it's been awful because the most fun thing about playing Mahjong is sitting and eating and visiting together. And we haven't been able to do that. So hopefully we'll start that up again. But I agree with you, Barb, the importance of also having fun, because all this other stuff, it's productive and it's stimulating and it's wonderful, but we have to attend to our mental and physical health as well.
Let me say one more thing. It has to do with being a really good role model for your children. It is an art, not a science. We are blessed with 2 amazing kids, and I will not spend the next 4 hours telling you about it because nobody wants to hear about it. But we are good role models because we never made our accomplishments an issue. We always talked in terms of trying to support what our kids do and what our kids did. They're amazing children in terms of what they've done. Not only are they financially successful, they have all the right values. So anyhow, children are not a sideline. Children are at the top of the list. And I think Len and I, and Len in particular, has always been, he's always been the sort of, he sort of caught the kids as I was sort of saying, did you finish your homework? And it takes balance. Anyway, again, thank you very much.
I think we all share that value about our kids being number one, of course.
Well, actually, I would say grandchildren are number 1.
Yeah, forget the kids. It's true.
Yeah, I have 5 of them now, and they're the best thing in the world. By the way, one thing I want to add is, about having fun. I always tell my students, when I ask them, what do you want to do? And I don't mean what do you think you're gonna be doing, but what do you want to do? I said, do what you want to do. Go after what you want to do. Life is so much more interesting and satisfying if you get up every morning looking forward to what you're going to do. Than getting up in the morning and hating what you're about to do. It changes everything about your life. I learned that I got a great education, great schooling at UCLA. I got my education being a maintenance man at a film developing lab for 4 summers, putting myself through college. And I was a clock puncher. And every 2 minutes, I'd look at my watch. When is it going to be noon for lunch? When is it 12:30 when I have to go back to work? When is it 4:30 when I can go home? And I swore to myself, I never want a job where I'd have to punch a clock for an 8-hour-a-day job. Not that it paid well and it gives you a lot of dignity, but it's boring as hell. And I ended up in a job where I worked 14 hours a day, mostly 7 days a week. I never looked at my watch, was always late because I loved what I did. And I think that's so important. That's one of the reasons I in my retirement, which I don't consider to be retired, I went back to something I always wanted to do, which is teach. The last thing I want to say, and Honey mentioned it, mortality. That's an issue. It has been an issue for me because only one member of only one male in my family lived beyond the age of 70. And that was a close cousin of mine, almost my second father, who died in the recovery room after his second bypass. So he had arterial sclerosis for quite some time. Everyone else every other male in my family, some lived to be 60. My dad died suddenly at the age of 70. My grandfather died at the age of 67. And of course, everybody tells me he didn't jog in Minsk. But I made it my business, in my early years to do a lot of physical exercise. But I always had this notion that you never know how long you're going to live. And I figured if I got beyond 70, I'm ahead of the game. Well, I'm now 72 and a half. So I consider myself ahead of the game. What I didn't anticipate was that my beloved wife, Barbara, whose mother lived to be 93 and whose grandmother lived to be 103, would die before I did, and she did a couple of 2.5 years ago. So this whole retirement wasn't intended this way, but the last 2.5 years have been made a lot more manageable for me because I have, you know, a purpose. And yeah, I'm having a ball. I don't know what real retirement is, and I hope I never have to realize it. My phone's ringing here.
That's a good ending.
Disconnected. Anyway, thanks, Janice, for inviting me, and thank you all for listening to this. It's been very interesting. Enjoyed listening to Honey as well, and to you. Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for being here.
My pleasure.
Okay,
And thank you.
Joel, it's back
Yes,
to you.
Janice, Zev, and Honey, happy Honey. Thank you all for joining us today for our end of the year Hazak session. This was fascinating and inspiring, honestly. I'm ready to go out and start my memoirs.
Well,
It was a pleasure to
just
be
buy
here.
mine.
Okay.
If you're not going to write it, you can buy it.
Buy mine, yeah.
Could I add something? Could I?